Our next speaker is Mathieu Isidro. He's the Communication and Outreach Manager for SKO, and he's going to tell us about SKA's past, current, and planned broader impact activities.
Right. That looks like it's on. Okay, I'll just check the slides work. Yes. Great. Thank you very much for having me and for the opportunity to speak. I'm Mathieu Isidro. I'm the Communications and Outreach Manager at the SK Observatory. I'm actually the backup speaker for this talk. It was going to be my boss, the Director of Communications, was going to give this talk. And he didn't tell me that I would be speaking in front of 300 people. So yeah, I'll do my best. So I'm going to fly through some of the activities that both the SKO is doing, but also a lot of our partners. As you heard this morning from Phil Diamond, our Director General, the SK project is a massive international collaboration. So really, I just wanted to share a few thoughts that sort of sit behind all of my slides. The first one being that it's very early days to measure the impact of the SKO, right? We're a very young organization. The team really started about 12 years ago. When I started, I was employee number 31. Our headquarters was only built 4 years ago, and our first contracts were awarded 2 years ago. So we're still, we're very early on into that process of measuring our impact. But that being said, the impact of the SK goes much beyond the work of the observatory. And with the project being a partnership between 16 countries and institutions, you have that huge potential impact around the world. And particularly, I want to highlight, and I will in my slides, the work of our partners, both in Australia and in South Africa, who've been working on the ground for, well over a decade, 15 years, to get the sites ready and to develop the communities there. So that's what I wanted to start with. In terms of definition here, what do we talk about in terms of non-science impact? It's basically the contribution of research to the economy, to society, to culture, and to sustainability. And that's how I'm going to structure my talk, to go through these four elements. Yasmin touched upon these Sustainable Development Goals. For those of you who aren't familiar with them, these goals were determined by the United Nations, and they're sort of the major challenges, essentially, that society has to address, and societies have to address around the world. So there's sort of a driving principle for us to align to in terms of how we measure our impact. And when we talk to funding agencies and to governments, we like to highlight how we contribute to many of these. So obviously, now are my animations going to work? Yes, okay. So you have the very obvious ones like, contributions to industry, innovation and infrastructure, and decent work and economic growth, right? That's the sort of stuff that we're familiar with. Quality education, are the sort of things that that research contributes to. But there's also other things, right? So affordable and clean energy, you'll see that I'll talk a little bit about this later in my slides. Climate action, but also sustainable communities, life on land, and good health, and even going into reduced inequalities and gender equality with a lot of the work that's happening nowadays in broader impacts. And I forgot to highlight 16 and 17 there, which I'll also talk about. So we try and touch on a lot of those. And in terms of the footprint of the SKA, you've seen the slides this morning. We really have this broad partnership, 5 continents, which enables us to have this collaboration, both north-south and east-west, which opens some interesting opportunities in terms of impact. And then the 16 countries that are involved overall, I just thought it'd be interesting to highlight that 11 of those are members of the G20, 6 are members of the G7, and 3 are members of the BRICS. For those of you who aren't familiar with BRICS, that's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So really a huge collaboration of countries, and both emerging and advanced economies. So in terms of, I'll just go back a second. Yes, in terms of what drives our work on impact, Phil this morning mentioned the treaty that we have, the international treaty that was signed to establish the SKA Observatory. And now many of those international treaties start with a preamble, with a set of statements, and important statements that the parties agree to when they sit down and sign those treaties. And so there's a number of statements there about ambition and about science, but there's also statements about embracing the potential for scientific discovery to contribute to advances in technology and innovation and to deliver a broader benefit for industry and society. So that's right there in the founding treaty of our organization, and is a statement that all of the countries that are part of the SKE agree to support essentially, which is a really powerful message to send. The parties also are committed to an organization where diversity and equality are promoted and respected. So again, this is a great statement to have, statement of intent to back some of the activities that we do. International cooperation, testing the limits of engineering, and global effort and long-term investment. So really a lot of important messages for us in terms of the wider impact of the project. So diving into those 4 pillars, I'll talk a little bit about some of the contributions to the economy, bearing in mind that what I'm using here really is examples of impact, and there's many, many more that I would need a whole day to get into and to cover some of the other impacts. But basically, in terms of jobs and job creation and investment into local economies, I'll take the example of our headquarters here at George Rowe Bank in the UK. And so when that was built, that created employment opportunities in the area. That was 16 or 18 million euro investment by the government to build this facility for us. And so what they did is they did an impact assessment, and they calculated that with the staff that's moving there from 20 plus countries, that staff and their families are expected to spend £6 million in the local economy every year, and spend £6 million in the local property market over the years, right? So it's just a concrete little example of the impact that a number of people have in any given community. This is an example from China, where they've long been organizing training schools, summer schools, for young students to learn key skills to become radio astronomers. Now, these schools happen in a number of SKA partner countries, so this is just one example, but they've been doing this since 2013. So over that time, every year, so over that time, they've trained over 700 young students from all over China, including remote regions of China, and equipped them with essential skills to become scientists. And some of them have gone on to become successful researchers now and are involved in China's activities and research on the SKA. So that's again a nice example of skills training. In terms of innovation, this is an example with our Italian partners who, together as part of an international consortium, developed the design for the low-frequency antennas. Now, that company is a company called Sirio in Italy, a family-owned company, and the work that they did as part of the SKA enabled them to develop a version of the antenna for commercial purposes for 4G communications. And it's an antenna that they're marketing in Europe and is having quite a bit of success on the market. So again, a great example of innovation stemming from radio astronomy. We also have examples of spin-off companies. This is but one of them. A small company called Atlar was born of software design work for the SK in Portugal. They now employ 15 people. They train several post-grad students every year, and they're winning contracts in other fields with the European Space Agency, with the defense sector. And you can see the quote there from their CEO saying, basically, without the SKA, that company wouldn't exist, right? So again, a nice little example of a concrete, broader impact. I'm showing you a little bit of data here from South Africa. This is from an impact assessment that they've done. This hasn't been published yet. It's the final report's being prepared, but it's to show you the scale of investment over the years, both in training and in the number of grants that have been awarded to students of all levels throughout the years, right? And you can see the sums of money we're talking about here, 250,000 euros a year on training, and 1,400 grants to date. So this is work done by the South African Radio Astronomy Observatory. And here's another slide. I'm not going to go through all of this. I think the slides will be made available afterwards, but it's a summary of the impact they're having in the local province in the north of South Africa. And the total investment over the past 12 years is, I think in euros, 700 million euros that has been invested, right, with a whole set of different impacts there. So that's a few examples of economy. You're very familiar with examples of societal impact. I'll take this example here of an astronomy festival that's been organized in Western Australia for a decade by ICRA, which is a Center for Radio Astronomy Research built to support the bid for the SKA. And they've now had more than 40,000 visitors engaged with astronomy in Western Australia, and there's a real excitement for astronomy and astronomy careers as a result. This is a really nice little example, again, from South Africa. During the pandemic, the South African Radio Astronomy Observatory was tasked with designing a homegrown ventilator to solve the issue of not having enough ventilators in the country. It's a problem that they solved incredibly well because they had all of the skills in project management and engineering to do that. And I think it's more than 20,000 units were produced and delivered around hospitals in the countries that needed it. So, you know, a great example of how radio astronomy skills can benefit society even on a very short time scale. And then some examples of science diplomacy and our work in international forums. This is quite specific, I think, to the SKA collaboration being an intergovernmental organization. You see a picture here of the French president with the South African president on a recent visit, not quite at the same level. There's the colleagues and myself at the UNESCO headquarters last year for a session on sustainable development. So again, we take part in a lot of international forums. We're members of the International Telecoms Union, which is the UN agency tasked with giving slots in the radio frequency spectrum. Basically, so we're members of that. We're now observers on the United Nations Committee for the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, where we advocate for dark and quiet skies. So we take part, you know, and engage in those forums with the opportunity to have an impact there on regulation. Culture, I will just touch briefly on this, but our Australian partners have been leading the engagement with the Indigenous and communities in Australia and the traditional owners of the land there. That was led by the Australian government and our colleagues from the CSIRO. We have in the room an expert. We have Douglas Buck from the CSIRO, who's right here. So if you have specific questions about that work that they've been doing over the past several years, he's the man to speak to. But in a nutshell, essentially, there's an Indigenous land use agreement that was negotiated with the Wajari Yamaji, the local Indigenous community, and the Australian authorities, which basically establishes working practices and sort of mandates cultural and heritage preservation and promotion in the area, and really a partnership with the local communities who have a you know, decision making in you know, the uses of the land, as well as having the ability to you know, opportunities for job and business growth. And one really nice touch was that the site was renamed, and the Wajari gifted the site a really lovely name, Inyarimana Ilgari Bundara, in the Wajari language, which means sharing the sky and stars, which is a very appropriate name. I'm running out of time, so I will zoom quickly. There's a lot to talk about in sort of art and pop culture. One of the things we've done is an art exhibition called Shared Sky, which brings together artworks from Indigenous artists in both Australia and South Africa that's traveled around the world with a close involvement from the artists. You can see the EU Commissioner for Research there with one of the artworks, and some images from some of the exhibitions around the world. But there's also appearances of the SKA and other radio astronomy facilities in pop culture, right? And on TV, in cartoons, in books, in music. Radio astronomy appears in a whole bunch of elements of pop culture. And for those who are familiar with this particular show, you might see in the background some SK posters that were there. So if you go back and watch some of the episodes, you can look for SK posters in there. So again, it's just an example of embedding our facilities in public consciousness. A couple more slides and then I'm done. Talking about sustainability, I've got an example here, a really lovely example of the work again that our Australian partners have led in Australia to build an off-grid solar hybrid power station on the site. That's a 1.8 megawatt solar array with a battery, which for a time was the largest battery in the country, I'm told. And one really interesting fact there, you can see from the calculations they made, by having that power station, they avoided the use of 800,000 liters of diesel a year and 2,000 tons of CO2 that weren't emitted, right? So those are some really impressive numbers there. We are doing work as well, the SK Observatory, in terms of sustainability, and we're designing our own power station, both for Australia and for sort of the outer arms in South Africa for the dishes. One of the interesting facts is we've learned lots of things about designing a really quiet power station. And so my power engineer assures me that our design is the most radio quiet power station in the world. And the first prototype will be built this year in South Africa. And then a couple of additional initiatives to wrap up. The area around the site in South Africa was declared a national park and adds 3% to South Africa's national park surface area, and allows to do a lot of work in terms of protecting indigenous species, removing invasive species from the area and doing research on the site. And our colleagues in Australia did heritage walkovers with representatives from the Wajari community leading that to identify important heritage around the site and protect it. So again, some nice examples of collaborations and work there. And if you'd like to know more, you can take a look on our website on how the project is benefiting society. And you can take a look at the, I think it's 500-page construction proposal, which is also available on the website. And there's a whole chapter dedicated to impact. And I'll stop here. Thank you very much for your time.